Good morning, everyone. Why don't we get started? I know there's a few folks that are still calling in. Uh, so good morning. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. My name is Jack McDougall, and I'm President and CEO of the Greater Washington Board of Trade. The Board of Trade, we've now hosted more than 20 of these virtual briefings for our members and partners since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. It's providing opportunities to share important insights and key learnings. I am really pleased at this point that more than 90% of our member organizations have participated in one or more of these briefings, which is a really strong sign of engagement. And we look forward to continuing that in the weeks ahead. You know, as we know now across the country and parts of our region, even COVID-19 cases are increasing in some instances. So managing through all this will take time as we continue to face great uncertainties. So this is not going to be something that we'll respond to very quickly. And we'll talk a lot more about that today with our guests from Accenture and a great panel of business leaders from across our region who will share some of their insights on how to navigate the uncertainties that we're facing. In particular, the discussion will explore how we can use this moment to rethink, reimagine, and reinvent what it is that we do and our business models. First, I'd like to welcome our presenter, Paul Nunes, the Global Managing Director of Thought Leadership at Accenture Research, who will share some interesting analysis to set the stage for today's discussion. Paul's team of more than 300 researchers across the globe partner with world-class organizations in all industries to deliver new insights and thought leadership. He's well-known and highly regarded author and speaker on the topic of business strategy and has 30+ years of experience with Accenture. His research focuses mainly on technology-led changes in business and marketing strategies. Following Paul's remarks, he will turn it over to his colleague, Tawfik Jarjour, Senior Manager with Accenture Strategy, to lead a regional conversation with our panelists. Dave Dacquino, Chairman and CEO of Serco, Mary McLaughlin, Senior Vice President, Beltway Region Comcast, Blue Jenkins, President, Washington Gas, and Sharon Pinder, President and CEO of the Capital Region Minority Supplier Development Council. If you have any questions at all during the discussion, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen and we will get to those. And also today's briefing will be available later this week on our website. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Paul. Paul, thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Jack. Thank you so much to everybody at the Board of Trade for the opportunity to be here and give some opening remarks. I'm just going to talk a few minutes about some of the research, some of the findings, and some of the points of interest that we've seen at Accenture in trying to understand a little bit about this COVID experience and its implications for business and society. I can say in 34 years with Accenture, as I suppose many of us on the call can say, we've never seen anything like this. So it is a bit of terra incognita. But we do think, and we are starting to find some insights that are helping us to manage that. So with these few minutes I'd just like to share some of those with you. On the next slide, I think the question we would start with is perhaps this idea of reopening. What is exactly the reopening? I think in this picture, it relates to something that Churchill once said. We're not at the end, we're probably not even at the beginning of the end, but we may be at the end of the beginning. And so I think all we really do know is that we're past the initial surprise and the initial shutdowns, and we know that we're into some level of reopening, and we have a lot of questions and uncertainty that creates. On the next slide, you can see that part of the reason it's so hard to give advice or to speak to answers or to try and find answers to this particular challenge is that there are so many differences. It really has been so disparate in its impact, not just in terms of workers and society, but also in terms of industries and businesses. And so here you just see a little bit of the mapping of where we can see remote work supported or work from home, as well as occupational risk. So I know that for everybody on the call, what we have to try and do is think a bit about, what does this mean for our particular industry, and are there really insights that we can gather, that we can generalize, and also where do we have to drill down and be very specific about our own solutions. That said, on the next slide, we think there are four real insights I'd like to talk about that we've seen about how to go about reopening and how to manage somewhat better this next phase that we're in. And those four insights, the first one is that the need to outmaneuver uncertainty. One of the first things that I was challenged with when I was asked to help Accenture develop some strategies and some insights was this whole idea that there's so much that we don't know, and that until we know more answers about some of these things, it's going to be impossible to give a right answer. So one of the things we came to is this idea that we needed to integrate scenarios of the future and really grasp and outmaneuver the uncertainty that we were seeing, and really have some strategies for managing uncertainty. So I'll speak about that a little bit more. The second big insight was that to reopen is to reinvent. And I wonder and hope and expect that a lot of folks on the call are seeing that, but none of the folks that we talked to, both our clients and our client leads internally, everywhere we turned was the story that we don't want to go back to where we were. We need to reinvent now for a post-COVID future, that consumers are never going to be the same, work environments are never going to be the same. So much has changed that we don't want to design a way back to where we were. We want to get to a new and better place. So this idea of a reinvention approach. The third thing that we saw that was really important and interesting was this idea of the need to transform organizations and their underlying capabilities. This reinvention is not going to come from the same organizations that we were, and that we're going to have to accelerate, in many cases, the adoption of the technologies and approaches that were already in place, but to build the kind of capabilities that are going to provide us with the organization we need to succeed going forward. One of the things that we talk a lot about there is this whole idea that we're seeing 3 years of innovation applied in 3 months. And we see that in a number of places that we work with, the National Health Service in the UK, for example, adopting millions of seats or hundreds of thousands of seats of teams in a matter of days, not months, as we normally would. And countless examples like that of how we're accelerating capability change. And then the last thing was this idea of, well, we can't do it all at once. How do we prioritize this? And so we recognize the need for a real prioritization and a sense of a simple but useful map of how to go step by step into the future. On the next slide, we'll see a bit more about scenarios. And I just want to say a few words about that. I imagine that some of you have seen various scenarios in different places. These are the ones that Accenture developed to help us understand the circumstances a bit better. Really 2 sets of critical uncertainties. We developed and we found over 40. At some point we had over 100 different uncertainties that we were really curious about. But we think it boils down to 2 things that we really need to understand where we're going. One is the disease progression, and that talks about manageable or unmanageable, and really in 2 ways. One is the disease itself going to be unmanageable, and whether or not we're going to find ways, vaccines or other things, to really kind of harness and manage the disease itself. And then the second set of critical uncertainties really turned around societal response, which was government, people, business. Will they collaborate? Will the cohesion and will cooperation stick? Or will it become contentious? Will it become ineffective versus effective interventions, fiscal interventions, policy interventions, et cetera? So looking at those 2 sets of uncertainties, we recognize there were at least 4 key ways that the future could play out. And here you can see the names, and I won't go into too much detail of it, but I showed you that earlier curve. And here we see that, in fact, the real curve is likely to be different and along different sort of paths. So you can see cyclic outbreaks, or in fact, a rapid remission, etc. Now, the reason it's so important to think in scenarios is because in each of these scenarios, if we accept that as our base assumption, we see that the implications for our strategies are very different. So how we manage our supply chain is very different if we believe there are going to be cyclical outbreaks than it is if we believe we've actually flattened the curve, or that we're going to continue to improve in some places in a rapid remission fashion. So, you know, how we handle our employees and talent, how we handle our supply chains, how we handle a great number of decisions in our real decisions we have to make in our business has to do with the scenarios that we assume. Next slide. Now, what we found that we're working through on the global level through Accenture is that, you know, we see that there's a difference in these scenarios in different countries and different regions. And I think we all sort of understand that, and might say that in some of the bottom left, China, South Korea, New Zealand, even that they're actually in a rapid remission situation. Others seem to be entering and continuing into prolonged chaos. What's interesting here is that on a global level, many multinational corporations have to manage a multi-region set of scenarios, not a single scenario of COVID. We see this to be true also in regions, and you see it even in the states, in the United States, and in the different states that have to create, and even cities and locales having to manage very different realities on the ground versus generalized outcomes. Next slide. So what do companies need to do? This was a set of activities that we saw from our clients and from our research that seemed to put the right steps in the right order. The first thing was to put the people first. It's always about understanding our employees and our consumers, our customers, whether that be the citizens and citizen needs for public services, or in fact consumers. And only after we've gotten that right, you know, supporting households, seeing the whole employee. This was all about the needs for employees that are dealing with elder care or dealing with children at home. These are the things that we have to put first as our priority. Second thing was designing, and in many cases redesigning spaces that work both for employees and for business transaction. Where will people find their services? How will we service folks? Redesign in phases. This was really this idea that it became evident that it wasn't going to be a one-shot deal. We were going to actually need to plan for multiple plans. The need to commit to an elastic cost structure. It very clearly became much more than liquidity. So now we think in terms of not just liquidity, because liquidity is still a challenge, particularly if we're entering into a relapse, but also how are we going to manage profitability? Do we have expectations of profitability? And even how are we going to manage long-term viability? You know, is now the time to be planning already for potential exit, if not from the entire business, but from portions of the business that may no longer be viable in the coming future. And that leads to the last step of getting future ready. And this really was the idea that with reinvention is going to come innovation. And while it may seem far down the road, how are we actually going to figure out how to reinvent, and do we have the right resources and capabilities in innovation, surprisingly as part of the conversation right now to help us get future ready. In the last slide, I'm just going to say a few things about what we're looking at right now, which is the potential need for a course correction. Even in just the last 5 weeks since we came out with our reopening messaging, we've seen a number of changes, some detours to be made, some course deviations. And we think it falls under 5 quick categories. One is the assumptions under questions. I talked about the scenarios. We think assumptions about disease management have changed even in the last 5 weeks. And surely we've seen some assumptions about societal response changing in just the last 5 weeks. So we need to mind the gap that's forming between our previous assumptions about the scenarios and the current situation. Diverging markets, we see an acceleration of the divergence of markets, creating even more need to understand things at a global and local, regional, sub-region perspective. Rising tail risks, greater hedging needed for chaos. Choice over policy, we see a real shift from the need for individual responsibility on behalf of companies and organizations in a space where policy is not necessarily giving all the answers that we might like, and also maybe not being as respected as we might have imagined or liked as well. And then the last thing is a physical refocusing, and that's this idea that as we come out of sort of immediate stopgap measures of finance, of government supports and emergency measures, that we need to really embrace a longer term view of where our fiscal and ability to be sustainable financially is going to come from. So that's some of the things we're seeing. Hopefully that leads to a great discussion. I'll turn it back now to Tawfik to lead us in some discussion.
Oh, hey, Paul, this is Jack. Just real quick, there was a quick question on one of your slides. Where does France fall in the scenarios?
That's a great question. Where does France fall? I think, knowing what I do with the curves, France is actually sort of at the bottom with a blip, sort of like Italy and the UK. And most of Europe. I would say it's still the question of whether or not we're all going to be in a relapse. So it leaves us in kind of this center and regionality. So, Paris may be over it, but the outskirts, depending if you have supply chain in southern France, for example, but also the question of, the nature of, I think tourism is 17% of France's economy. So that goes back to the industry question, which is that the French tourism industry would probably say it's a very different scenario than maybe Michelin or some other parts of the economy.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, with that, we'll turn it back now over to Tawfik to get us started in our discussion. Thank you all.
Yeah, of course. And let me give you some quick introductions to the panelists. I know we had a brief intro earlier, so I'm just going to go through one by one and tell you one special thing about each person. So Dave, he's not only the chairman and CEO of Serco, he's someone who comes in with extensive experience in the federal, local, and state government sector. And as we all know, the government is extremely important in what we're doing today. And he can provide some really good insights as we answer questions that are related to the government as well. I also want to introduce Mary, who's coming to us with extensive customer experience background. So she knows, she's worked her whole career with customers and the consumer, from her time now at Comcast to her time prior to this, even as an attorney general, taking care of customer protection issues in Massachusetts. And I'm happy that we have her on here to be able to provide that perspective. And then for Blue, it's awesome to have him here. He comes with a background in the energy space, but specifically in his current role in Washington Gas, he gets to work with all of our essential workers now. And so he comes to us with a perspective to say, how do you really deal with a time whenever your company can't have your folks work from home, whenever they are essential and they have to be there? So it'd be really good to hear his perspectives. And then finally, last but not least, Sharon comes with a few awesome things that she can help provide to the group. One is she has extensive experience with small business programs, which is it's a very, very important thing for the times that we're facing right now. And then she also comes with an extensive nonprofit and minority small business perspective as well. So I'm really excited to hear about the input and insights she can share. So with that being said, we want to move into the questions. And I've got some prepared as well, but we've got some coming in. So I will do my best to keep up with the chat, and I will stop sharing my screen in the meantime so you can see the panelists. So, but with that being said, I do want to get us started with one while I go through the questions. So one is for Blue. Blue, a question for you up front. Just great to hear about how your company has adjusted your decision-making process to all of the uncertainties and changes that Paul was mentioning and the scenarios that we're considering that have been presented by COVID-19.
Yeah, good question. I expect we've all done things that are somewhat similar. I'm going to take a couple of points out of Paul's presentation because they really resonated, and I think they're consistent with what we've done at Washington Gas. Number one is you put people first, and that, you know, that's your employees, it's the communities in which you operate and serve. So put the people first. And then the second thing is solve in phases. So, you know, I'll tie that together with some of our core values. Number one is work safely, think responsibly, act with integrity, and make informed decisions. And so I give that just as a little bit of a backdrop. So, you know, to your point, Tawfik, you know, we've got about 70% of our workforce who doesn't have the option to work from home. So, you know, we have finance and accounting and legal and regulatory and all of the folks who back that workforce who have the ability to work from home. And then we have the good men and women who are out in the streets that you see every day, keeping the system operational, expanding the system, you know, upgrading the system, keeping it safe. And so one of the things that we had to do was determine how do we keep our people safe, and that includes the community as well. And so we quickly adapted the way we think about that in terms of it's no longer just we have operational procedures and processes in which we keep our folks safe, we keep the community safe, but now we're working in a pandemic. We have to change the way we operate to keep our employees safe. We have people at home working from home, and so there's the odds, candidly, of more contact on the street and, you know, when we're working in someone's facility than we had before. And so we put, you know, in terms of trusting our people and our training, so you reinforce the messages, you get very specific in your guiding principles and the operational procedures in which you have in place. You train, you retrain, and then you trust your people. And then we keep that feedback loop open so we can adapt as we go. And we've been very successful in keeping our workforce safe and keeping the community safe and being able to do it digitally and remotely in a way that we couldn't do before.
That's really, no, that's great, Blue. And I think one follow-up question to that, and I'd love to hear, I think Sharon, we had some perspective from you on this one. It was just, you mentioned at the end, how do you utilize this digital and technology perspective to be able to innovate? And I know, Sharon, there's a lot of challenges that all companies face, but especially around the small businesses. So it'd be wonderful to hear from you about how the small businesses that are out there are facing that digital and technology challenge today.
You know, I think it is probably prevalent for not just small businesses, but all businesses. Well, if you look in terms of, and I think probably the most overused term during this entire crisis is pivot. Right? It's essential, right? And so in order for, as you look at sustainability and leadership around this, it's about pivoting. And so when you look at just choices that we had to make, and I can tell you as a nonprofit, we just happen to be, for a variety of reasons, located in a medical building. And so when this hit back in March, you know, employees first, I had to be conscious of you know, quickly switching to teleworking model, and quite frankly, not being ready to do 100% teleworking. And then looking at the kind of tools in order to, because you have to still communicate with your team, communicate with your customers. And what tools do you put in place in order to make that happen? Well, part of this is kind of baptism by fire. We made a decision in terms of our communication strategy would be through platforms such as this. So what decisions do you make around the evaluation of whether it's Zoom, go to webinar? We initially started at Teams, but making those kind of decisions, connections with your team, to look at what those tools be, like Trello is one that we're examining to look at how do you do project management and collaboration tool. And so as you look at all those things essential to the operation of your business, the communication to your customer base, then you pivot to ensure that you can take care of those things.
That's wonderful. And I want to take a chance. I see that Mike's asked 2 questions in the chat. So I'm going to do our best to make sure we can answer these questions the best we can, Mike. And so I'm going to have multiple people answer each different part. So Paul, maybe to the first part, can you, the first question we have was around the immunization scenario. So really comes down to if some countries and some areas and regions have immunization and have herd immunity, but others don't. how do companies approach that? So maybe if you want to give a little background on that scenario, Paul, and then I'd love to get, if any of the panelists want to step up and speak to this one. I know it's challenging, especially when you have your employees all over the place and responding differently depending on the immunity.
Yeah, well, I think that actually highlights, it's a great question because it really gets to the heart of how do we handle the different situations, and does COVID go away? And I think the big lesson there is to think about, it's not really gone until it's gone for everyone. And so some of that goes to what Blue was saying about, putting the people first. So, if there are, even if it's the problem is solved in some places, we have to wait till it's solved for everyone. I think it raises the question, it continues the question of operations to be very practical, and even the nature of recurrence, so vaccines, are vaccines really going to work? So the need, as we get a little more time to hedge, and I think one of the big things that in terms of will never be the same is, I think we're going to be a lot more focused on resilience, and having the capability to, respond to these sort of things in a way and not get caught off guard like we did before. So, and I guess the big thing I would just say is the first one, and to Blue's point, that it's not over till it's over for everyone.
And yeah, and I mean, one of the parts on here, it'd be great to get, Dave, your perspective, because I know that we've talked about your experience having to work across all these different regions and with the different teams that you have. How are you planning on addressing this?
It's a good point. One of the things that we all have to focus on, of course, is we're leaders and managers, and so we want to control and manage. And I think in this particular situation, it's really important that we understand that we've got to give some top-level direction. We have got to count on the local management looking at the societal restrictions in their specific area and what's happening there to execute and be able to be flexible with respect to that. So that probably one of the toughest things that we've had to manage, and we've got about 8,500 employees here in the US, Canada, and internationally, is being able to give some freedom to make some decisions. But then again, you've got to be careful because folks can't be given full reign, because you've got to be careful and balanced as well. The other thing I'll mention is we really wanted to focus on the business and not the pandemic. So when we had folks furloughed, we had our whole company focused on how do we repurpose those folks that were furloughed to help with other areas that they could telework on, and not just focus on our individual situation. So I think, Tawfik, it's a balance there of giving good direction with some flexibility, but keeping folks really focused on the mission itself.
No, that's wonderful. I mean, that takes me to one of the next parts is then how do you work with your customers? And Mary, I know we have a question in the chat that I think you probably have had to deal with before, and it comes down, one of the things we had discussed in a question coming into the session was around preparing for a post-COVID landscape, and especially how do you interact with your customers in a post-COVID landscape? One of the questions we have is talking about how there's all these captive shared service centers, and they're in different locations across the globe, but how, as a massive company, you're coming from Comcast, like many of the people who are on the phone here today, you have people working all around the world. How do you react in the future? Just so we talked about this resiliency, how are you planning ahead for how to operate in a new normal?
Yeah, I think we have to be resilient. As you said, I think we have to think about redundancy and really leveraging our teammates across a variety of ways. So, for example, when the pandemic hit, we moved about 1,000 call center agents from our call centers in Baltimore and Silver Springs and our dispatchers from those same locations to work from home. The question that we need to answer in a post-COVID situation is, what is our balance of work from home versus an in-call center type workplace? We've always had work from home agents, but it's been about 20% of our call center agents. Post-COVID, it probably looks much differently than that. It's probably primarily work from home. So that's the type of thing that we're dealing with now, both locally here in the Beltway region, but also nationally. What's the right mix of, you know, in-house, onshore, offshore, because you do need that redundancy. And we need to protect our people, right? If we bring them back into offices, we need to ensure that we have the right social distancing protocols, the right protocols around healthcare and temperature checks, and people having the ability to work from home or call out if they do have symptoms. You know, I noticed another question, Tawfik, around how do you engage people in a virtual world? And I think this leads nicely into that. And Sharon touched on that a little bit. It really is about the technology. We have embraced Microsoft Teams at Comcast, and we use it probably 12 hours a day. And so how are we getting teammates comfortable with it, but also creating some boundaries so it's not a 12-hour work day, and we're creating time in between calls to get things done. And we're creating virtual social interactions to keep our teams engaged. And it really is a different type of leadership in the virtual environment. And so it's, you know, how are we profiling for that? How are we coaching for that? And how are we role modeling as senior leaders?
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. And this is actually one question that I'd love to get each of the panelists' perspective, at least on something that you're doing to help encourage the creativity and social interaction, innovation with your employees, because I think every one of your organizations has moved to more remote, at least for some parts of your workforce. But how have you been able to continue that sense of community within your employee base?
I might just start with two examples, and then I'll defer to my counterparts. One being our ERGs host a weekly happy hour, employee resource groups that are available to all teammates, and it's Wednesdays, and depending on the host employee resource group, it will have a different topic, but there's always some fun built in. And then personally, what we try to do in our team meetings is do a check-in question. So as we enter the meeting, there's always a check-in question. It may be, what's your favorite vacation spot that you're missing? Or it could be simply, how are you feeling today?
I'll jump in too. This is Dave. We've done a couple things that I think are innovative and trying to get the energy level up, if you will. I know a lot of my peers have abandoned their intern programs as an example. We put our intern program in place. They put great energy into it. Of course, obviously a lot of it's virtual, but that has kept us going and focused on that. We do manager calls. We open up a line every other week now with 550 of our managers and my entire leadership team. And we have open discussions about what's happening and what we're struggling with and so forth. We've rolled out LinkedIn Learning and PMP certification, and we've got our folks talking about that and progressing their own career and getting new dialogue in there. So we stop the dialogue that isn't just about this pandemic, but it's about their own personal growth, the issues that they're doing. We have a Work Well series where we have individuals talking about how they're dealing with 4 dogs and 3 kids and grandma in the house while they're trying to work. And that's important because we're people and we're trying to deal with it. And it just changes the focus to one of, hey, they're figuring it out, I'll figure it out, and I can help by sharing my story. So it's just trying to keep that energy level up and keeping people excited and focused on the mission.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it seems like, in the word I use, it seemed like we're zoomed out, right? But at the same time, this has presented the opportunity to do face-to-face, because ordinarily when I did staff meetings, for example, people would be on the phone, they're other parts of the region. And so this forced us to actually look at each other on a weekly basis. And so as a result of that, we have really gotten to know each other a little bit better. And to your points, we've now come up with creative ways by which I started this thing about I'm asking questions. I'm asking because I can ask it. But secondly, it's an engagement tool by which we have really gotten to, probably sometimes too much information, but we have really gotten to know each other.
Yeah. Now Great comment, Sharon. I'd say we've probably all gotten to know our coworkers a little better. We've gotten to know the dogs, maybe some kids, maybe grandkids as they pop in and out of videos, right? And sometimes the coworker's a little horrified, and you take advantage of the opportunity and you say hi and you roll with it. I want to build on a little bit of what Dave said. So we have tried to figure out ways to engage our employee base as well. Certainly the use of technology, whether it's Zoom or Teams or WebEx or whatever your preferred methodology is, has been helpful. Like Sharon, I actually require anyone on my calls to have their camera on because I want to be able to make eye contact. I want to make sure we're engaged. I want to make sure we're not multitasking like we may have had a tendency to do in the past. We've also done a couple of virtual town halls. That's worked reasonably well. We're getting better as we go. We're exploring how do we manage virtual offsites. I expect that there is somebody out there in the cyber world that has perfected or is perfecting how do you do a cyber offsite. And so we're working through that. The other thing that we've gotten really good feedback on is we occasionally have myself and one of our other senior leaders do a quick video, and we record it and we push it out and we put it on the website, and we'll pick various topics and various leaders across, some work related, some, personal related, how are we dealing with this or that. And that's gotten really good feedback of our employee base being able to see the senior leadership group and being able to connect in and then follow up with questions. And so we've used some of those things reasonably successfully so far.
Yeah, and Blue, while you're on, we have a question that goes to your other employees. So especially, I'd say for you in particular, you have a good number of the people who you work with who are essential workers who just can't get away with having them social distance in the same way that others are social distancing and staying and working from home. So how do you make sure that they're protected, and what are you doing about that group specifically?
Yeah, great question. About 70% in round numbers of our workforce are the folks that, to your definition, essential workers. So that it's really understanding what processes and procedures do we utilize when we're out in the field. So what is the job and the task at hand? It's understanding how we can manage, in some cases, your point, some of it you can do social distance, some of it you cannot. So it's about having the right PPE, mask, gloves, all of the protection. There are certain cases when you get a phone call and you may have to actually enter a residence where somebody says, look, I have a leak or an emergency. And that requires, very, what's the word I'm looking for? Coordinated conversation, making sure that the individual at home understands, if we enter your residence, we want to make sure you're safe, that we're safe, we'll have appropriate PPE. Do you have PPE? How do we manage that? So I would tell you, it's all about training and understanding the process. Our leaders over those operational groups have done an outstanding job of ensuring that all of our folks who are in the field every day have all of the equipment they need, both personally and professionally. And that as we engage the public, that the public also understands, how we do that as well. And we've used some messaging tools to please ask the public, we're here, we're performing essential service. We need to keep you safe and us safe. Please give us some distance, please respect the protocols that are in place and those type of things. And as a general rule, that's worked very, very well.
Yeah, and I think maybe just to take a step back to the last question we have here in the chat, Paul, I want to run by you. I know one thing that you've been working on, we talked about this initial piece here, and there's some research you're doing on what the future will look like, and so what future workforce is. And the question here is there going to be some kind of hybrid work from home, digital, reduced office presence work setup? Maybe if you can speak a little bit to what you're finding in your research.
Yeah, I think the answer is all of the above and then some. I think even before COVID, one of the things we were doing a lot of research on was the future of work, right? And the nature of work and the technology enablement. One of the things I was going to say about the previous question is one of the things we're experimenting a lot now with is Mural and other kind of collaboration software things. So how do you put Post-its and sticky notes all over the world? So really getting into this next level of technology enabled collaboration, particularly because I think where we're seeing a little overemphasis on this, work from home is working great, and I think I might have caught it in the question, is that the innovation part and the creativity part and who you work with and who you bump into, I don't think we're really going to understand probably for 12 months or more at least how that has going to impact organizations and the nature of organizations and creativity, growth, innovation, et cetera. So I think what we're seeing is, some of the leading companies have kind of thrown away past models on a certain level, assumptions. I know that, a lot of assumptions of, customers want to be in the facility for banking or public services and stuff. We've learned an awful lot from this about what customers like and will tolerate and that, and particularly employees. But like I say, I think it's also early days. So my hope is we're going to be starting to see companies inventing a lot of new ways to support this stuff.
That's great, Paul. And you pulled into a topic that I was hoping to get to. And I think this one I'd love to hear from a little bit from all of the panelists on, and this has to do with customer engagement. So we've talked a lot about now employees, but it'd be great. And maybe Mary, if you can kick us off, just wonderful to hear about what are specific things you're doing to engage your customers. I know it's been hard. You don't have necessarily the same kind of in-person or the stores or having your representatives go to people's homes like you used to. So how have you changed the way that you interact with your customers and make sure that they feel like they're being listened to?
Yeah, and so, throughout the pandemic, we continued to interact with our customers. Our stores were open for a good period of time with social distancing, closed when we really got to the height, and then reopened. And like Lou, I still have many colleagues and teammates who are in the field, but we had to reimagine some of our operating model. And instead of going into a house to troubleshoot, how do we do that via some of our apps? So our My Account app, or troubleshooting via the voice remote on the box, or via Xfinity Assist or X-Fi. So while we had invested a lot in digital tools prior to 2020, the usage of our customers with the digital tools really escalated pretty considerably, March, April, May, because, they didn't want people in their house either. They, had a very important product. They were relying on broadband connectivity like never before. So wanted to ensure that we could support them. We also, spoke with our customers quite a bit, whether it be directly or through social media, through paid media. And we also leveraged our platform, particularly the video platform. And so we were able to create curated content around COVID. And so people could go one stop to find information on COVID. We worked with Common Sense Media to create some education resources for K through 12. Again, just by people speaking into their remote, they had the opportunity to do that. And right now we just launched a summer camp that customers can take advantage of, and they can, again, use their voice remote to find activities ranging from arts and crafts to cooking to basketball skills. So really trying to innovate in how we're talking with our customers constantly and through a variety of mediums.
Look, I'll jump in too. So I'm GovCon, and we're kind of a pretty uptight group, right? So we talk to our customers in very prescribed ways, and we're very careful. I love it because this has given me the opportunity to pick up the phone, call the customer and say, hey, how are you dealing with this? How are your employees? And we've had great conversations, and we've shared best practices, and we talked about what we're struggling with. So it has fundamentally changed the relationship in a lot of ways and broken down a lot of protocols. And, we're just real people trying to figure this out. And so I think it's been great. It's one innovation that we're going to try to keep up. And yeah, we probably use this as an excuse to pick up the phone and say, this is what we're doing, but the result's been terrific.
I can go next. Part of what we had to do is kind of step back and figure out what's the business problem we're trying to solve for our customer, right? And so from our minority business perspective, we knew that gravely impacted by the pandemic for a number of reasons, economics and a whole bit, and that there was, in some cases, a lack of preparation, a sudden change in what they had to do and their impact to their customer. In terms of our member base, we're a nonprofit, remember, we looked at our corporate members and some of our government members and looked at what we saw was happening with their workforce, what we saw was happening with their contracts, and figured out how do we then add value to our constituents as far as communication is concerned. And so we did several things relative to, we knew that what was important for our minority business base is to have information about contracts and contractual opportunities. And the same thing in terms of our corporate members, looking at what's the type of information that we can get through all the noise and that's important to them. And so that's how we figured out and customized and was intentional about how we communicated with our customer, and then changing our approach, because as a nonprofit, fundraising is essential. And so we go to from a face-to-face and figure out how do we then substitute that, and guess what? How do we then raise money around it? And so that has been kind of essential as well.
Yeah, so some great comments. I'd build on what Dave said. I think it's been a wonderful opportunity to pick up the phone and have a conversation with, with key relationships that perhaps you were a bit more structured with before. I think that's a great comment. For us, we took a step back and want to understand early in the days, so what is this going to mean for our customer base? How is this going to impact them? So, I was very pleased. We took, even before the mandates came down from local leadership, local, state, and government leadership to suspend late fees and disconnects. We wanted to ensure that we didn't add incremental stress to our customer base as they tried to navigate these waters. That was important to us. I've been really pleased at our corporate response, where we dedicated $1 million towards COVID response, a large portion of which we have put right into the community, and in some cases, towards food banks and those type of things to help those who are significantly impacted. We've run some radio spots to communicate with our customers, very broad brush in terms of here's what we're doing and here's what it means for you. And, certainly you can reach out and talk. And we've tried to, we don't have the creative opportunities perhaps that Mary has to put programming, on our network, but we've been very thoughtful in reaching out to our customers to make sure they understood what tools were available to them, how they could reach us, what resources they had available both via phone or internet or whatever. So we certainly use Mary's support. I use her network every day, right, to be able to work from home as I do so. So we're grateful for the way all of these leaders have come together. But we took a thoughtful approach of what does this mean to our customers and how do we help? How do we help reduce some stress in a way that we hope is helpful during these times.
And then, Paul, I don't know if you want anything to add from an overall perspective. I think you're still on mute.
Nope. Yeah. I'll leave it there actually, because I think there's some more interesting questions, and I see we're getting closer on the time. So let's keep up with the questions.
So I do want to cover. So the first one is talking about how has this helped you to address like broader issues? So we talked about climate change, social equity. Are there other things that you're able to respond to or think through because of it's really the pause that's been forced by the pandemic and making you take a step back and think through it. So maybe if we want to go in reverse order, because we were starting with Mary last time. Blue, do you want to go first on this one?
Sure. There's so many things happening there. I'm going to touch on climate in particular. We had filed, just at the time COVID really got started, we had filed a climate business plan in the District of Columbia. And it was a forward-looking view of what are we doing as an essential service provider in the region, but particularly in the District of Columbia, to help meet the objectives around climate change. And we laid out a plan between now and 2050. And this has actually required us, because we have a community engagement process around this. We want to hear feedback and input and, what thoughts are out there and what are we thinking about and how do we share that? Normally you would do that in a very large group setting, and you'd have a big facility and you'd pack several hundred people in and you would go through a process. Well, that's certainly not available. And so while we're focused on climate, it's important to us, it's important to everybody in the region for sure. Now we're using all of these digital tools to continue the conversation, to engage. We're still going to hold our stakeholder meeting, but we're going to do it in a digital format. And so we've tried to keep, and I think maybe Dave said it early on, it's about business, right? So how do you keep your business moving forward? How do you put your people first? And how do you use these things to continue to drive forward? So for us, we've used all of these digital tools to keep moving the climate discussion forward in a way we think is meaningful, because we don't think you can hit the pause button on that while we figure out things like how we navigate through COVID-19.
Absolutely. And then Sharon, you want to go next?
Calling on us, or we'll just jump in.
Yeah.
Because usually I have to figure out an obscure way to bring up sustainability in the environment, which is really a passion for me. So thank you for doing that. We've got a couple of our interns talking to all our management about environment. It's embarrassing because they're trying to explain, do you know what sustainability is? Now that you've got time to go walk around your neighborhood, you can get a sense for what the environment's all about. So that discussion has really been great, and it's added a lot of color. We do get to know each other as well. The other thing we've done is Serco Foundation has matched and told their employees, if you've got a nonprofit that you're really passionate about, put in an application and we will fund them some money. So it brings the employee and the company together about beyond the company, right? And environmental issues and other nonprofit issues that are important to them. And that passion has been critical. And it's just the ongoing dialogue. We've even done a cookbook where we're talking about this crazy stuff we're doing now because we're stuck at home. And again, it creates relationships and depth of relationships that will help the company going forward. And certainly we're paying more attention to the sustainability across the board. And I think that's terrific. That's one great advantage.
Before COVID, we were certainly going down the path of always trying to find an innovative type solution for our customer. But with COVID, what we've also had to take into consideration, particularly again, my base being minority businesses, we've had to layer on top of that the George Floyd situation. And so when you look at COVID plus the civil unrest across the country, one of the things that we weren't prepared for is how do we address this? How do we help our customers, the minority business base through it? But more importantly, how do we help our corporate members address it now that they're kind of looking at it through a different lens? And so we've seen as a result of it, there has been change in our environment all the way around there. And so the conversation continues, and we're trying to figure out how all that fits in and how we make it beneficial for all.
And maybe I'll just build on what Sharon said as it relates to social justice and equality. We know that not everyone has access to the internet, access to digital tools. And so, we've always had the Internet Essential Program, which allows for low-cost internet access to folks who are economically qualified. The pandemic has really helped us take that up a notch, in that we're partnering with many municipalities, many groups and organizations to provide sponsored service. So for example, Arlington, Virginia, we've recently partnered with them to ensure every student in Arlington has access to the internet, and they've leveraged funding through the CARES Act in order to do that. And we're happy to partner with them, working with other municipalities across the footprint to do the same, because not everyone has access to the internet, and that's tough in good times, and it's unconscionable where we are right now.
This is great. I know we have more questions in the chat. I just was checking on the time. So what we'll do is, for the questions that are remaining, they're all relevant. We'll cover them. I think we covered the last one a little bit about virtual tech access. Thanks for doing that, Mary. And what I want to do is I want to give each of the panelists here a chance to respond on a more of a broader question that would be helpful for us. Is having gone through the first couple months, and obviously this is going to continue on, but do you believe, based on where you are today compared to whenever this started, do you believe that you're in a better place to weather the storm, and that you're in a stronger position as a company as a result, in terms of understanding how to deal with a crisis situation, how to deal with the challenges that you're seeing your customers and your employees facing?
Okay, I'll jump in again. Look, I think we're doing better. This all caught us by surprise. I had 2 weeks to put 3,000 people in telework. It was really difficult in trying to get it. And the things that I thought would be the most critical that were going to shut us down didn't turn out to be the issues. Yes, we're learning it. We're figuring out. As a community of our company, we're focusing on our employees that are furloughed and what we can do to help them. We've got things like vacation donation programs to help them if they've run out of that time. We are looking at the social justice issues and say, what has this made raw that makes us more aware of the issues that are out there that we're focused on? And then finally, we're worrying about each other and our customer mission. And that has brought us together. If we can harness that and keep that going forward, we'll be better off as we go forward. But yes, it's extremely difficult. And we're learning every day by talking to each other, our peers, and our customers.
I'll jump in. I would echo some similar themes. I think from a resiliency, and I'll use that term intentionally, from our ability to execute in changing times, I think we've always been pretty agile, as an essential service provider, and this has helped us gain even more comfort in our ability to do that, to issue work remotely, to follow up on that, to use technology in a way that we had been testing but hadn't gone to from a reliance perspective before. So I think we've learned a lot there. Even in terms of efficiencies, we've found some opportunities in which, when we talk about, the new normal, I think Paul used the term the never normal, that there are things we've learned that we will continue and carry forward, which will make us better as a company. It'll make us be able to execute in a way that adds more value to the communities in which we serve. So this has actually highlighted some things that will make us more efficient as we move forward. And I think for that, we're better off.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that, we have really been focused on three things: providing care and support for our teammates. And Paul talked about, it's not just them, it's their home, right? It's who they reside with, who they care about, and ensuring that. I think the second component is really making sure that our customers stay connected to what they need, to our products and services. And third is to make smart, thoughtful business decisions that not only care for the business today or care for it long term. And I think some of those business decisions that we've been accelerated to make have really reimagined the business, and we will be better for it in the long run.
For me, I have a different perspective. I'm actually afraid of 2021, to be honest with you. And because we're a charity and because our reliance is on our revenue, and we've diversified our portfolio. I also have government grants, but there's a question mark there too as well, right? So not only from an infrastructure standpoint, I think, we can stand up but 2021 is a big question mark. But what keeps me up at night is that when I look at our base of businesses and the potential of maybe half of them not being able to survive this, that's a different picture for us. And I think that's the reality of what's happening in the marketplace, particularly for small businesses, and dependent upon what that industry is. When I look at some of our corporate members, whether it's hospitality that took a big hit, whether it's real estate, whether it's tourism, some of those industries will never be the same again, or won't be the same. You won't be the same again as we see it today.
That's a really good point. And then Paul, maybe if you just want to add a little bit to close us off.
Yeah, I think Sharon makes a tremendous point, because I think that we see the social implications, but the implications, the economic implications may be a bit of a tsunami that, we're seeing the tide go out, but the real hit may not yet be here yet. I think what I do see and appreciate from a lot of clients, and I talked about the reinvention agenda, is just the desire to build back better. So whenever we can get back to normal, it does fill me with some hope that nobody wants the same, nobody wants to go back, nobody even just wants to build different. They want to build better, whether that's sustainability, whether that's social justice, whatever it is. we're trying to build back better. And I'm looking forward to us getting there eventually.
This is wonderful. And thank you everyone for speaking today. I'm going to transition off to Jack to close us off.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Paul, thanks so much for getting us started. And Tawfik, thank you for leading us in that conversation. And Blue, Mary, Dave, Sharon, as well as Paul, thank you for sharing your insights. Mary, I use your pivot to in-home call centers a number of times to demonstrate how different organizations are navigating these times. And I'll continue to do that, but I picked up a few new examples today as well. So I really do appreciate that. And thank you everybody for joining us. It was a good conversation. This is going to be ongoing. I think it's one of the highlights today is that this is a long-term effort to figure out where we're going to land at some point. And so we'll have a lot of opportunities to talk and work together to figure out what's going to work best for our region. And so thank you everybody so much. Thank you again for joining us. And I look forward to staying in touch with all of you. So stay well and have a great day. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.